If you've been scrolling through our Instagram, you may have seen a sad photo of little Ollie all wired up, IV in, heart monitors on. We had a little bit of a scare with him. And
Mhm.
in the last episode, we've been kind of sharing personal updates from our time off after having a newborn baby son, Oliver Wave. So in the last, if you missed it, check it out. Chelsey and I told his whole birth story, the meaning of his name, and the adventure that birth was. Me being in Mexico, flying home, like getting there just in time, and some of the roller coaster we went on with that. This episode, we are going to again give a little bit of a disclaimer at the beginning here. We are talking about a traumatic thing that did happen. It did involve hospital stays with a small baby. So if that's something you don't want to listen to, you can skip this one. The outcome is totally good. So I'll give you the spoiler now. We're not going to cliffhanger you the whole time here.
Mhm.
And we're just so thankful for all your support in this. Like our community totally helped step up and our team helped step up. And man, you guys just showered on prayer in the time of a little bit of uncertainty that we did have. And we just really felt the love. So we just want to kind of let you in to our lives with this episode. Again, just another personal update. We're probably not talking about passive income on this update, even though our business was running while we were at the hospital. And that was such a special thing to experience. But beyond that, just the community support in the Rainmaker family was so powerful. So
Yeah. So this, like Steven said, this episode is just to bring you into our lives because we love sharing about passive income, but family is super important. And in family, there's always stuff that is happening. Sometimes you see it on social media, sometimes you don't. And so there are I think, a couple takeaways that we want to share with you. But more than anything, we just wanted to give you a life update. So
Ollie is with us on this episode.
Yeah.
You may hear him making some baby noises in the background.
I might have to feed at some point. We'll see.
Yeah, he's 2 months old now at the time of recording this, which sounds very old. I feel like 8 weeks sounds better,
Yeah.
right? I'm like, oh, he's 8 weeks.
Hi,
He's
buddy,
still a tiny
saying
baby,
hi.
but 2 months. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, so where this all started. So Oliver Wave was born on March 6th. And basically from right before I went into the hospital, Kaizen, our 2-year-old, had some kind of cold that was happening. And for the first month of Oliver's life, Kaizen had a cold, which is
Like
pretty
some
normal.
sort of sickness. He was kind of like in and out of something.
Yeah, in and out of something. And we brought Oliver home, and Kaizen was still kind of like sniffly and all of that. And at one point, Kaizen, we took him into the pediatrician, and he actually had pink eye. So that happened.
It felt like a month of kind of all the things happening. And I don't like to say when it rains, it pours, because I feel like you shouldn't just curse yourself like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it did feel like one of those months where it was just like, oh my gosh, like all these things.
Yeah. And the transition from 1 to 2 and even Kaizen around Oliver was great for the most, like it really was. I think more than anything as parents, it was just hard watching your toddler not feel like himself.
Yeah.
And he definitely was a little bit more moody, as anyone would be when you're not feeling well. So that was hard. And I did notice probably after week 2 of Oliver being home, we both knew that Oliver caught a little something of what Kaizen had. His nose was a little more congested. It was harder for him to breathe, not breathe at night, but just like nursing was a little harder. He kind of developed a little bit of like a cough. But again, it's like there's not really a lot that you can do with a brand new baby. Like we weren't going to give him like any medicine or anything like that. And I knew that Kaizen had some kind of cold, and therefore like Ollie got it. And, we weren't going to like quarantine Kaizen or anything like that. So I knew that had happening. But what happened
we were definitely trying to avoid him not getting the cold, but it just, with a toddler who just is really excited about his new baby brother, it's just
kind of wash his hands and try not to kiss his face and like all those things.
Yeah.
But basically what happened, Oliver had just turned 3 weeks old. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we were with my family. We went to this event outside, and my dad was holding Oliver, and I looked at Oliver, and he just looked like bluish gray and purple, and something in my spirit just didn't sit right, and it kind of scared me. But Oliver only looked that way for like a couple of seconds, and then his coloring totally changed.
Yeah, and it was kind of cold outside, so it was kind of like, maybe he was just cold.
Yeah, and he was getting hungry and a little restless, so I fed him, and he seemed to be fine. And then right after that, outdoor event that we went to. We went to the grocery store and he was in his car seat. And again, I saw Ollie like turn that purpley gray color and it really scared me. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're
Yeah.
inside. He's just sitting. Why is he looking this way? And also on top of that, Kaizen was kind of like being restless. And so it just made me like turn into like mom, a little bit of panic mode. So I grabbed Ollie out of the car seat and I told Steven, I was like, check out or whatever you need to do, but like, we need to get home. Like, I want to call a pediatrician. Like, something just wasn't sitting well with me.
And we were in like Trader Joe's. So I was like, oh, I think it's the lights, babe. Like, it's like, it's like the lighting's weird in here,
And we were both like in agreement, like we should get home because Kaizen like needs to eat and
Go to sleep.
he needs to go to sleep. Yeah, it was just like you could just tell when your toddler like needs to go to bed. It was one of those moments.
And it would just kind of like you would see like he looks very gray, but then like a few seconds later he would not. So you'd be like, am I just like seeing things? It was just really weird. But Chelsey had the mama's intuition to just go, no, there's something here. So call a pediatrician.
Yeah,
so we went home.
We called Steven's parents and just said, hey, can you come over and like be with Kaizen in case.
I think they put him to bed that
I don't
night.
know. Yeah,
we were just like, we need help.
Feeling overwhelmed because like I wanted Steven to help me with Ollie and kind of figure out what's going on with him. And so it's just really nice. I love having our family in town. They're such a gift to us. And it was so needed for them to put Kaizen down. So we waited on the pediatrician to call us. He called us. He didn't really seem too concerned. And he's like, if these things happen, like come in tomorrow,
Yeah.
And so right after that phone call, I nursed Ollie. And while I was trying to burp him, he just seemed like he was struggling. Like he was coughing. He kind of was having these purpley colors. It just didn't feel right. And I know that like there's only so much doctor can say over the phone, especially because we hadn't seen any other like super serious signs that were happening with Ollie other than like we knew he had some kind of cold. And so we told Steven's mom, like, I told Steven, I said, I want to like go into prompt care and just have him checked out. Like maybe I'm overreacting, like, and I'm fine if I'm overreacting, but this is like your baby and we might as well, like, we'll just spend
got nothing going on tonight. Let's go.
And Steven's mom was super supportive and was like, yeah, you guys go. It's rather like be wrong than, not. And so
I feel like when we were leaving too, like
I was getting emotional
and my mom was getting emotional. I was like, what's going on? Like, this is going to be fine.
I started crying. I was just like,
I know. But like, it hadn't hit me, like that, like something was going on.
Yeah. Well, I think I was just sad because I was just like, God, like I had a rough pregnancy and like the birth was like this roller coaster and I come home, my toddler's sick and like, he's not himself, which I think was sad, and then like my baby is like not being himself either. And it's just like emotions and hormones or who knows what. So we go to prompt care and lo and behold, one of our Rainmakers actually works at prompt care. So she was the one who checked Steven in. And I was praying. I was like, I would love favor as we go into prompt care that we'd be able to be seen quickly, that it wouldn't be a long line. And that all totally happened. So I got to wait in the car with Ollie at prompt care because I was like, I don't want to go into a place that people could be sick with a sick baby. So we only waited like 20 or 30 minutes and then we got to walk in. The doctor that we saw was absolutely incredible. And he basically like educated us on some things and he was looking to see how Oliver was breathing and like his oxygen levels. And he just said, like it's really hard to tell. Like I would encourage you to go to Enlow's ER. Enlow's the hospital in town and just go and be monitored for a few hours.
Yeah, get monitored for a few hours. Cause he basically was like, when adults get stuff, like it's kind of like a slow thing, but when babies that are this young get even a virus or something and their lungs aren't fully developed, it can be a pretty fast escalation of kind of like from not serious to serious. So he's like, just go be monitored for a few hours.
Yeah. So we're like, yeah, let's do it. So I don't know. It's probably like 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah, it's probably 9 o'clock at this point. We go to Enlow, they get us in, do some tests, and start monitoring him.
Yeah. So they start monitoring him. At that time, you and I are both calm.
Yeah. We're just like, hey, we'll be here for a few hours.
Yeah,
and
we'll be here a few hours. If anything, like maybe we'd spend one night if they wanted to monitor him overnight. Like I'd totally be fine with that. And that is kind of where things started going downhill very quickly. And I don't really know what happened other than like Ollie's coloring. I think when the ER doc came in, Ollie's coloring was kind of going in and out of like that grayish color. And even his legs looked that color, which hadn't really been before. So his coloring was changing. And then he started having some pretty severe apnea.
So that means he would basically just stop breathing. So he, babies, I guess naturally, because this is one thing like we Googled when we were watching him a little more intently is like, yeah, he's like stopping breathing. And so, of course I Googled that. I guess babies do this. Like they will stop breathing for 10 seconds at a time. Sometimes it's like their breathing is pretty irregular as a newborn baby.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's nothing to worry about. But he was stopping breathing for like 15 seconds and then 20 seconds and then 30 seconds. And then like, it was like, okay. And like every time he'd stop breathing, like he'd just be like asleep. He'd look super peaceful, but like we had to wake him up basically. So like nurses would be like kind of poking his foot or not poking, but like tickling his foot and like, come on, Ollie, wake up, And so at that point we're like, okay, something's going on here. Like he is kind of like every 2 minutes, every 3 minutes, just like not breathing for 30, 45 seconds. Like it was like going on too long,
Yeah. And I can't remember if they wanted to do some kind of like blood work or chest x-ray on him at that point. I don't really remember.
They were doing a lot of tests.
They were doing a lot of different tests.
They had to heel prick him and they had to get little heart monitors on him. And
yeah, they were doing like some heart monitoring stuff. And I think once the heart monitor stuff was on him, that's when he started having more intense apnea because they were monitoring him and we had been in for a while. And the doctor had kind of been coming in and out monitoring. And that was when things, like I said, got serious. More people started coming in. And then our nurse came in. I only heard it from the nurse, but I guess the doctor had mentioned it. And they just said, he's having apnea. We want to send you to Sutter. And as soon as I heard that, it was like, what? Like Sutter would mean being airlifted to another hospital.
Well, I didn't even know that at that point. I was like, well, yeah, we'll drive there, right? Like,
yeah.
But it was like, no, we're going to airlift you to this hospital that's in a bigger city and has more resources. And that's where it was like, oh, dang, like
this is really
that
serious.
only happens to like really serious like cases, right? Like it just like kind of escalated and there's a ton of people in the room, like doing different things and testing different things and like
yeah, it was definitely some shock. And nurses came in and they were like, okay, we've decided that he's going to be airlifted to Sutter, which is in Sacramento, which is an hour and a half from us. And in order to be admitted at Sutter, they're going to want these certain tests done, which includes putting an IV in, heel prick, and all these things. And at that point, Enlo's flight team had come down and they were kind of assessing the situation. There were a ton of people in the room. And I think at one point when they were doing the heel prick, the nurse asked me, she's like, do you want to step out and just have your husband be in here? Like, I know as a mom, like sometimes watching, potentially your baby crying and being upset at their heel being pricked can be stressful. And I was like actually really grateful for that. So I went out in the
Chelsey was definitely going in some roller coaster emotions.
Yeah, so I stepped
which
out.
I totally understand.
Yeah, I stepped out, and that's when I texted my parents because up until that point, it was probably like maybe midnight then. We hadn't told my family, and so that was when it hit me. It was like, oh my gosh, they're going to airlift. They want to airlift my baby to another hospital. Like this is really serious, and the nurse came back in to come get me to bring me back in. And she just said, how are you doing? She was amazing. She's just like, how are you doing? I also want to let you know that there are a lot more people in the room now, which isn't a bad thing. They're just all doing a different job. And I just started like crying, like really crying. And I walked back into the room. And I think at that point actually was when Enlo's airlift team was all coming in. They had brought 2 NICU nurses down to the floor just to help monitor and be with him. And I was just like, sobbing, you know. And I think right before that, they did put an IV in and I was able to hold Ollie.
Yeah.
And
I was in the room for that. He's 3 weeks old. He was 3 weeks early.
Yeah.
So he is tiny. Yeah. And we're so thankful. This nurse like nailed the IV first try.
And he didn't cry.
Which was crazy. Like they like literally put a flashlight on someone's phone up to his hand.
His foot.
Or no, his wrist. You could see through his, like that's how little he was, you know what I mean? Like they put their cell phone light up to it. They turned off all lights, put it out, and you could see the veins. And then they had some other fancy machine too. But it was like that was literally how delicate it was, and she got it the first time, which was amazing.
Yeah, and she was an incredible nurse, and she was like, "Oh my gosh!" And like all of them at the ER, like our hospital isn't huge, so I think they were just all like, "Oh my gosh, this baby's tiny." Like they don't deal with
Yeah,
tons
it
of
felt
tiny
like they had not
babies.
seen a baby that small in the emergency room in a long time, if ever. Like people were like, "Oh my gosh!" Like like how? Like, it was just like weird. Like I was
Yeah,
like, "Doesn't this stuff happen all the time?" I don't
yeah.
know. It was weird.
So
Um,
he was being monitored. He had the IV in. The flight care team had come down. I thought we were going to get going in just a few short minutes. We had called Steven's parents. They had brought us a bunch of stuff because they're like, well, we're going to be in the hospital for at least a night. And we didn't come
yeah.
with that much stuff, you
And
know?
Chelsey would fly with Ollie, and then I would drive. That's kind of how it worked. You could only fly with one person,
Yeah.
and so I would drive the hour and a half. She would fly.
And we were getting ready to move in that direction. And then Enlo's flight team assessed the situation. And for whatever reason, they came to the conclusion that they weren't going to fly him. And I think,
They basically like noped out of it. They're just like, we can't fly him because
yeah.
he's too little.
Yeah, and I don't know if they didn't have the right equipment or if Enlo didn't want to be held liable. I don't really know, but I think we were kind of shocked because I didn't know that happened. It was like, well, he needs to be flown, and you guys have a helicopter, so
Yeah.
are you going to fly him? And so the two NICU nurses are in there trying to stabilize him, trying to wake him up. He's kind of like definitely going downhill a little bit, and it's scary, but then he does stabilize. But we're there for a couple of more hours because they had to call two other flight
Like
companies,
private flight companies that do this thing. Like they have flight teams from all over different cities.
Yeah. So they finally got a hold of the flight care team from Reading, which is an hour and a half from us. And they agree to fly Oliver to Sutter. And at that point, they'd also told me, like, you are not guaranteed to be able to fly with your baby. And I was just like, what? What do you mean? You're not 100% sure that they'll let me fly with my baby. Like, he's a minor, he's a baby. Like, are you kidding me?
Oh, hell no.
Yeah. And
we're
then,
like, Chelsea's flying with the baby.
Yeah.
You know?
And I talked to the nurse a little more, and she said, I think that and I said, why is that reasoning? Why can't they say yes or no? Like, that's crazy to me. And she's like, I think it's because they want to assess the situation. And I understand now. And if you can imagine, like, say she's like, just be calm and show that you're not a crazy person and you'll be fine. And basically, like, their number one priority is the patient, which in that case was Oliver. And if something crazy were to happen to Oliver on the flight over, and, they have to perform some crazy medical procedure, and I'm sitting there watching this happening and freaking out, like, their job is to not calm me down and to protect, their job is to protect the baby. So they just wanted to make sure that,
especially
like,
in a helicopter.
And yeah, like, if something were to go down, is this parent gonna be able to, like, handle herself, And so I understood. So I was like, okay, I can be calm. I can do this.
Yeah, and you were a lot more calm at that point too.
Yeah,
because Ollie had started to kind of stabilize, and like there's still apnea, but it was a lot shorter, and we were like, it was good.
Yeah, so we all kind of calmed down for the next, like, couple of hours while we waited for the flight care team to get there. Oliver was doing great. Like, I had stopped crying. The NICU nurse who had been there I recognized her. I was like, I think you were there for part of Oliver's birth. And she was. I think she had come in at one point. I'm not really sure. But Oliver had been stabilized. The flight care team came in. They were awesome. We were going to be driven from the hospital to the little tiny Chico airport in an ambulance. Oliver was doing great. I was able to nurse him, which was really good. Cool.
And all his little wires on.
Yeah, with all the little wires on. It was still really scary, obviously, because it was like there's so many unknowns. Nobody had really told us, like, oh, you'll be fine. Like, he'll be fine. They weren't saying that. But Oliver, there's peace. We felt peace. So I was able to nurse him to the hospital. Ollie did great in the plane ride. He was totally stable. We got picked up at the Sacramento airport by another ambulance and driven to Sutter. And I think, we talk about moments throughout our story and throughout this where we find glimpses of hope, and you, like, cling to those moments of hope. And for me, I had one of those moments in the ambulance ride from the Sacramento airport to Sutter, which is a hospital in Sacramento. And those flight care workers, nurses, whoever they were absolutely incredible. So peaceful, so down to earth. And the older one, who I think she was, I don't know if you would call her the captain. I don't know what she was. She just said, like, she talked to me and she said, way to like use your mom gut to like know to bring him in. She's like, he's totally going to be fine. He just needs to be monitored for a few days. And Sutter is like the best hospital, but like, way to go. So she was just really positive and encouraging, which made me feel like, oh, okay, he's like, Oliver's going to be okay. And I needed that piece in our story, especially for what was going to happen next. So we get to Sutter, the hospital, and, you know, we go through all the back entrances with the security guard, with the flight care team. You know, my baby, Oliver, is like on this crazy stretcher, and then his little tiny body, which takes up like no part of the bed. And we get there, and Steven and I are texting that I had landed. And the crazy thing was, like, Steven's mom is at our house back in Chico with Kaizen. Obviously, Kaizen's asleep. And she had been praying and praying.
She's like still up at this point. It's like 3 a.m.
She couldn't sleep. And so she started praying for me, and she could kind of see, like, we have Life 360 as an app, as a family. And she saw me, like, she basically heard and saw the airplane that Oliver and I were in flying over our house in Chico. And she's
because like airplanes don't fly over at 3 a.m., you know?
Or really, there aren't a lot of airplanes.
At night, like really at all, you know?
In Chico, you know?
Yeah, and so she literally heard the plane, like, going over as she was praying.
Yeah, which is really
which is
cool.
Super cool. And just, like, knowing, like, okay, they're going to a good place, right? Like, Sutter was, like, super equipped. They got all the stuff.
Yeah.
We had just gotten a new car the week before.
Yeah.
So I got to really test out the car, let me tell you guys. Because, like, I was like, I won't want Chelsey. I mean, it's like the flight is not that long, you know?
Yeah, it's like
what took a long time was getting an ambulance, getting to the airport, getting on it was actually a plane. Usually it would be a helicopter straight out the roof of the hospital. But because we had to use the private flight team, it was like there's extra like pieces to this puzzle that I was actually able to I actually made it down to the hospital.
You got there a few
minutes
before.
Maybe speeding just a little bit.
I told him not to.
Okay, it's like 3 a.m. No one's on the road, you know, so maybe just a little bit. And my dad had like filled up the car full of snacks and Red Bulls. So thank you, Dad. And so yeah, literally as she walked in with the flight team, I was right there.
Yeah.
And that's what I didn't want her to be down there and have to make a bunch of decisions and like I not be there, you know. So
we got
that was super peaceful.
To Sutter probably, I don't know, like 3 or 4 a.m.
It's such 4 or 5.
I'm exhausted. I even like fell asleep a little bit on the plane ride because I was so exhausted. Like my eyes are so heavy, I can barely keep myself awake. So I got like a little 10-minute power nap, which was great.
I'm wired because I had a lot of Red Bulls.
Yeah, so we get in, and of course at Sutter, you know, they get us to our room. We meet our nurse. There's a whole team of people waiting for us. And little
they're
Ollie.
Definitely a little more serious at Sutter. I feel like Enlo, they're kind of like in Chico, they're kind of joking and like, hey, wow, this is
Sutter, they go
Sutter just
to
like straight to business. They're like, and they were nice later on, but it was like they knew that they had a job to do.
Yeah,
and it was just like. Things were like you see those movies where it's like a time lapse. It just felt like that. It was just like things are happening. They're doing these tests. They kind of had to do all the same tests that Enlo did.
Yeah. So they're like, you know, and he's not happy because he hasn't eaten in a couple. I don't know. Well, I guess he's okay, but he's starting to get more uncomfortable because they're moving him. They're you know taking off one monitor to put on another. And so they finally get him like set up in his bed.
And on the plane, he was pretty stable. But this like at Sutter, he really went downhill again in the morning.
Yeah, he started to kind of go downhill. And, you know, we moved my bed that I was going to sleep in close to him. And the idea was for him to do skin to skin, sleep on my chest, which he could do even with all the wiring. And the nurse was literally in every like 30 seconds, like trying to wake him up because he's having this intense apnea. Yeah. And so at that point, I'm like, well, he can't sleep on me because he's going to be poked. So let's put him back here. So he was again having more intense apnea, which was starting to get really scary.
Yeah. But they had all these monitors and stuff there. So it was like anytime it happened, it was a beep, beep, you know, I was like, so they would come in right away. And it was just that for like, I don't know, an hour or 2 hours.
Yeah.
And so we're praying. And then like the head person came in and
the doctor,
head doctor came in and she's like, you know, we may have to intubate him. Intubate?
Yeah, intubate him.
which is like, let's put a feeding and breathing tube in him through his mouth so that like he can get oxygen and food and all those things. And we really didn't want to do that, but like it was like if that's what would need to happen, like we'll do it.
Yeah.
But
She's like, we're going to give him a caffeine drip, but at this point right now, he's barely breathing. He's not breathing like he should be on his own. And, you need to breathe to live. And like, this is getting serious. And so we're going to try this caffeine drip. If the caffeine drip doesn't
yeah.
work, we're going to have to intubate him, and all these things.
Yeah,
And
so they
that's
did
when,
like oxygen in his nose.
yeah, they were already
And then they
doing
put
oxygen.
a caffeine drip through his IV to kind of wake him up a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
But at that point, when the doctor came in, they had tried right before that to do a caffeine drip through the current IV that Enlo, the other hospital, had put in him. But for some reason, that IV had a leak in it. So, like, the fluid got everywhere, and it wasn't working. And at that point, he was still not breathing very well. And so the doctor was almost like rushing and wanting to intubate him right then because the caffeine wasn't working. She's like, well, he needs to breathe. Like, we can't just keep waking him up. Like, something needs to change. Otherwise, this is not looking good. And you, Stephen, really advocated for Oliver. And you said, can we like try the caffeine drip, the IV again? Because if that works, that would be a way better solution than intubating him.
Because they had to like medically paralyze him to intubate him. And I was
Yeah.
like, he's 3 weeks old.
Yeah. And at that point, I hadn't fed him in a long time. And like, I was asking to feed, and they're like, we don't want to feed because if he throws up, which
if you intubate, yeah, it's like all this
stuff. And so the doctor's like,
I really felt like it was gonna work the second time. And so we texted all the prayer people in everywhere.
Yeah.
We're just like, pray for this specific thing. We believe in specific prayers because like then it's working, right? It's like you pray very specifically, that thing was answered, right? It's not just like, oh, I hope he gets better. It was like, pray that we do not have to do this and that this will work, and literally she gave it like 30 minutes.
And at that, I think the part that you're skipping,
okay,
that is like the hard part, is that I think at one point throughout the night, whether like Ollie was being monitored and good, and I was exhausted, so I went in the corner and like tried to sleep, and I think the doctor had come in, and she was more so talking to you because I was just so exhausted. So you said, yeah, go to bed. And that was when we agreed to try another IV. And so two women came in, two nurses came in to administer another IV. So they had to poke Oliver again. So I like wake up to hearing like my baby screaming, essentially. Like he was
they had
not
a hard time
happy.
getting that one in.
They had a really hard time getting this IV in, and I'm in the dark in the corner. I'm pumping because I want to keep my milk supply up, and I'm just like sobbing. I'm sobbing
that was rough.
because you hear baby crying. There's nothing you can do. Nobody's really told us yet like what the game plan is, and I'm like, for me, that was probably one of the roughest moments where I literally I was like, God, I feel like I'm in a nightmare and I just want to wake up. And I'm just like, I'm sobbing. And it was probably for me like the lowest point, just to like hear your baby and like, is he going to make it? Is he not? Like, you have those thoughts. At least for me, I had those thoughts. And it was really scary.
Yeah, really scary. It's really easy to cling on to doubt and spiral,
And finally, they were able to give Oliver another IV. It worked. And I think the doctor came in shortly after that, like maybe an hour after the caffeine drip happened. I don't know. It was that part is really blurry. Time just stopped, it seemed. And he started breathing better and on his own and not having as intense apnea. So the doctor was super happy. And at that point, there was like a nurse shift change. And Oliver had stabilized. We both knew that. So then Steven and I like slept until like 10 a.m. that morning. And woke up and we had this incredible nurse. She came in, introduced herself. She actually had spent time in Chico as a nurse, so that was really cool. And she just kind of walked us through the process because it's like, okay, we've been here. Now what happens? And so she said the doctor is going to come in, give you this game plan. Here's where the coffee shops are. Here's the cafeteria. Here's what I can offer you. And it was just like really sweet. And so things at that point felt like, okay, I think we might be okay, and yeah, and then the doctor came in and kind of told us like the game plan. And basically, what it was is like, we're going to continue monitoring him. The caffeine drip is still going. He does have oxygen, and the goal is to wean him off the caffeine drip and wean him off of the oxygen slowly. And if he continues to be able to breathe well on his own, they did give him some antibiotics just to rule out certain viruses and stuff, and certain maybe bacteria that they thought had gotten in. And so they just said, like, the plan is to slowly turn off of these things. And
Yeah.
the more he can breathe on his own, the less oxygen he needs. And if he reaches these certain levels, you'll be able to bottle feed him. And then after that, you'll be able to nurse him.
And I guess we didn't tell you guys like what Ollie even had. But like if we got, it would be no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
If Kaizen got, no big deal, but with a baby so young, like the respiratory is really the first thing to go. And as he, like when he was at this point now fairly stabilized and just kind of like basically recovering, it was just like, now we just need to keep him stable and help him keep breathing with the oxygen and stuff until he's over this. And at that point, it just felt very normal. Like it was like the doctor was like, yeah, this like happens all the time. It was like, we see babies like this like every week.
Yeah.
Which was crazy to hear. Like, it was like, oh my gosh, this is wild. Like this, I mean, the world that these medical people, especially at this facility, live in is just wild.
Yeah. And yeah, it was finally at that point that we had heard a doctor and some nurses say, like, he's going to be okay, like X amount of days kind of thing. Because up until then, and I understand, like, doctors and nurses, they don't want to say, like, oh, he'll only be here for a few days and then he'll be fine. Like, that's not, because a baby or a child could go downhill super quickly out of nowhere,
I think in these moments, like holding on to hope, like Chelsey said, is
Mhm.
so powerful, and so there were like, I mean, even the first guy we talked to at urgent care, he said like he's gonna be all right. He
Mhm.
like said that really briefly, and just like, you want to get monitored, but he's gonna be all right. Like, and I held on to that. And then and when we talked about it afterwards, you didn't even hear that one.
I didn't.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
you're like, what? He said that? And then for you, it was like on the flight, right? It
Mhm.
was like them saying like he's gonna be right. Because like you gotta like hold on to those things, right?
Yeah. And I think a big thing for me too is, like, you and I, even with Oliver's birth or different things that come up in our lives, we really try and lean into it and process as much as we can then. And for me, processing like my emotions and processing what could have been extreme trauma was allowing myself to just cry. Like, I cried at Enlo when I found out he was going to be flight lifted. I sobbed my eyes out, different parts. I think the first day that we were at Sutter, like, we had a social worker come in, which is standard at a hospital. It's, you
And
hear the
Nikki,
word social worker, but it's more of like somebody there for moral support, or like a counselor if you need it. And she just really sat down and just like, how are you doing? How can I help you? Like, here's things, like, this is normal. And I just sobbed when I talked to her, and just expressed my emotions of how this is not what I thought my life would look like when I brought home my baby boy. I thought we'd be at home, and my mama's heart felt tugged because it's like, oh, my toddler who I want to be with is at home. And I know he was well taken care of, but I was thinking about him. And then my little tiny baby, is right in front of me, like, sick. And that is really hard. And I think I just allowed myself to go through the emotion, whatever emotion I was feeling. I allowed myself to go there and to just release it. And I think crying for me is one of the ways that I like release it. And for me, it really helped me to leave the hospital without having these long-term trauma reenacting these things in my mind. And I think
yeah.
that's so important, because oftentimes we hold on to things, or we don't let ourselves process, whether out of fear or whatever the thing is, it's healthy to like go through those emotions and those cycles and
Yeah.
trauma and pain and all of that.
And we really like intentionally did this. And this is because of like what we've learned about trauma and what we've learned about like, really inner healing, right? Like because you can carry these things for a long
Hmm.
forever. And they can get into your cellular memory and
Yeah.
cause, even things that you wouldn't
Long
even think,
lasting
right?
effects.
Like,
Yeah.
and so we really spent time on the way home. We turned off the music, turned off the podcast. 'Cause we had like 2 hour drive home, and we got some juice and like some acai bowls, and we just like talked, and we really had an intentional kind of just like counseling session between the two of us to leave the trauma back like at the hospital. Like we
Hmm.
just were like, we leave that there and we just received this. Like, and we kind of like left it and moved forward. And, we are continuing to talk about it here and there. But I feel like that was so effective, even so much that like later that week, it was like I had almost forgotten the event.
Mm.
Like the event was still there, but like we saw someone in town who had seen it and was like, oh my gosh, how's Ollie? And I was just like, he's great. Like I just like had forgotten about it. And like that's like just a testament to like really learning to leave something. Like there's we learned from it.
Hmm.
There's nothing we could have done different. But it was something where it's like we're not going to replay this in our head and go down negative what ifs of like, well, what if it went a different way? Because it didn't.
Hmm.
And we just were so grateful and thankful for the support and how it did like turn out
Hmm.
and stronger because of it. And just like, we moved forward and just left that thing there. We're like,
Yeah.
we leave that at the hospital. And it was like crazy. Like as we were leaving, it was like 2 more were coming in.
2 more
2
babies.
more
Yeah.
babies were coming in. And I was just like, oh my God. Like,
I think that there are a couple like really big takeaways, at least for me personally, that one thing that I'm continuing to work through. But like on our last episode about Oliver's birth, we did talk about the medical field, and there's a lot of beautiful things about the medical field. There's a lot of really hard things that we don't agree with the medical field. And I think that you need to be like educated. And I think for me personally, like I know my body really well. I know that I can advocate for myself. But when it came time for Oliver, it was just like so unknown. And we watched medical professionals who are the best at what they do, just really love on and serve our family. And so I feel like you and I both have this newfound appreciation for the medical field and for people who do things with excellence. And I think that you can have both. I think that you can have incredible nurses and doctors who know what they're doing, who want to do interventions and different things. And then I think you can also like have more natural remedies that you go down. And I think for us, this example is like, we've kind of had both.
mhm.
And I think it gave me a greater appreciation just for doctors and nurses who are well educated, that see things all the time. And it also gave me a heart for them, like on another level. Like my mom is a nurse. I wanted to be a nurse at one time. We have lots of past wedding couples who are nurses and doctors and friends in the medical field. And I just have so much honor and respect for them and for their families and for the trauma that they walk into every single day. I mean, Stephen kind of briefly mentioned this, but it's like as we were leaving, like 2 more babies were coming in. And I think what broke my heart the most about this whole one of the things that broke my heart the most is there's this little boy. It's kind of when there's a bunch of things plugged in and heads are shaved, it's like really hard to tell how old somebody is. But I'm guessing this little boy was probably like 5 years old, and he is intubated. And I just like, it broke my heart. Like I didn't know the situation. Like maybe a day later he was going home. Like I don't know, but just to see this little body in this bed and like have these nurses and doctors care for him is just incredible. And we are really lucky that like it wasn't super serious. I mean, it felt really serious and it could have been even
It
worse.
was serious,
It
but
was serious.
we
Yeah.
are thankful that we had the right care, honestly.
Yeah, we're thankful we had the right care, and we're so grateful that we did get to go home. And some families, they don't get to bring their babies home, and that is really hard. And like I can't imagine the trauma and the grief that some families have to walk through. And
Yeah.
I'm super, super grateful that that wasn't a part of our story. And I know that that's really heavy. And um, I am just totally being honest. I am like, I'm finding myself in a few different areas, just like, oh, what if, or like thinking thoughts that I don't want to be thinking as far as like the boys go. So like I did sign up for like a more intentional spiritual kind of like counseling healing session, just because I feel like there are a few things on my heart that I just want to really make sure I've totally surrendered and not let it affect me. And even though
Mhm.
it's like tiny, tiny little things that have popped up since Oliver's thing, and I think honestly, since being a mom of two now, but I just know that if I don't nip it in the butt while it's small, it could grow. And I don't want those little blind spots or those little areas of
Seeds.
worry or seeds. Yeah, I don't want them to grow into something bigger. And so for me, I am taking steps that way. And I know that you would too if something came up like that, but that's
Yeah.
just so important. So thank you for listening to our story and part of our life that you might not know about. I'm sure someday, like as we put out, stories of our family and Oliver's birth, like I'm excited for them, our boys, to come back. I feel like someday and listen to these episodes. And I know parts of this episode was a little bit more heavy than sometimes what Steve and I talk about, but we just felt like it was an important piece of our story and sharing with you our life, hopefully giving you hope, but also just knowing that, yeah, sometimes things come up that are unexpected and scary and hard, and
Yeah.
leaning into community. I think that was a big thing for Steven and I. We had so many people from Rainmakers from all different areas. Like I had people, the week that we got back from the hospital, like texting me, people I hadn't talked to in years, just reaching out. And so if you were one of those people, whether you actually reached out or you sent up a prayer, a good vibe or whatever, we just want to say thank you. Like our family has felt so loved and appreciated through this whole pregnancy and birth process. And I just want to thank you for your time and listening and to hearing more. About us. And I do want to touch on one more thing. I shared it a little bit, just how Steve and I are really wanting to make sure that no piece of those events that could have been traumatic, we don't want any of those seeds to grow into something bigger. And I just want to encourage you, I think as parents and as you go through life, there can be moments where like a little seed of trauma or doubt or fear like can take root. And I just want to encourage you, like if you're feeling like there's something in your life that might be taking root, what can you do? Who can you talk to? I totally believe in like spiritual, healing that God can do, but also like professional help too, I think can be vital if needed. So we just want to
Yeah.
encourage you in that, because we want to see you walk in more freedom in your life.
Yeah. And we're not trying to plant any seeds. I know sometimes I've been on Facebook and read a story that's
Yeah.
traumatic or heard a story. And then somehow I'm taking that on as now a new fear in my head
Yeah.
about my kid. And so just release this, like say right now, like that was Stephen and Chelsey's story. That's not
Yeah.
a story for me. That's not a story for my kids. My kids will be healthy and whole
Yeah.
and protected. And like, so like don't take on this seed on
There's
you,
something that could happen to you.
and I
Yeah.
just got to say that as a disclaimer, because I've been totally
Mhm.
I've totally done that, where I see or read a story about a kid or something, or see a movie, and then all of a sudden those thoughts are knocking on my door in my head,
Yeah.
and I have to tell them, go away, that's not my story.
Mhm.
And so if that's happening to you right now, just I think gratefulness and thankfulness is such a diffuser of that, being like, no, I'm thankful my kids are healthy. um I'm thankful I heard that story, but it's not my story.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
And Ollie is here with us right here
Yeah.
if you're watching the video on YouTube. So Ollie, if you're listening to this in the future, I just want to
Mhm.
remind you
Yeah.
that we love you so much, and that
Mhm.
this was not an inconvenience for us,
Mhm.
that you are strong, you're brave, and you are like a wave. Like
Mhm.
when you're sitting in the ocean, you're waiting for that wave. God will always be faithful to you to send a wave to provide for you.
Mhm.
And that's one of the big things that like has been a theme in his life and in the season that we're in, that like that God is our provider,
Mhm.
and things may look scary. I mean, if you just listen to like a lot of our episodes over the last year, like we've had many of these conversations of how the abyss and the breakthrough and the
Mhm.
scary and the step of
Yeah.
faith, it's been the theme this year. And Ollie, that's for you because it's what you carry and what you
Yeah.
walk in is supernatural faith
Mhm.
to take steps that are bold and big and world changing catalyst.
Yeah.
Ollie wave,
Ollie,
Ollie
oh,
wave,
Ollie,
Ollie wave.
Ollie, Ollie.
I hope he watches this
I hope
and
he
looks at
does. He
himself. Look
totally
how
will.
cool
Look
you
how
are.
cute you are, bud.
Whoa.
You're so cute. Alrighty, well, we better end this. We gotta go get some dinner. We gotta go get Kai, who's downstairs with our amazing nanny, Amy. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for doing life with us. We'll see you next time on the Rainmaker Family Show.